Hello, and welcome to this Talks at Google event. My name is Bradley Horowitz. I'm Vice President of Streams, Photos, and Sharing here at Google. It's my pleasure to welcome you all for this very special afternoon together. How many of you got to attend yesterday's event? Oh, good. It looks like about half. We had a tremendous amount of fun. We had 4 world-class musicians sitting up here talking, jamming, talking about their craft, laughing. I laughed, I cried, it was beautiful, and more today. Today we're going to have a conversation between 2 old friends, Arturo Bejar and Philip Glass. And Arturo I've known for quite a long time. He's a bit of a Silicon Valley institution, and in fact, yesterday I learned that it was Steve Wozniak who actually brought Arturo from Mexico to Silicon Valley for the first time. He later went on to found a team called the Paranoids at Yahoo, which was first of its kind, really, in the Valley, that really focused on issues of spam and abuse, and he carried forward that work to Facebook, where he was at for many years, building the product infrastructure team there, and then working on issues of compassion and bullying and making that a safe and comfortable place for all of its users. He's since moved on from Facebook and is now focusing on being a father and a photographer. And one of the subjects of his photography is, in fact, Philip Glass. Philip Glass is a world-renowned composer and pianist whose work spans generations. He has composed, over the last 25 years, more than 20 operas, 8 symphonies, 2 piano concertos, and numerous soundtracks to films, and all the while maintains his extensive solo creations on piano and organ. He grew up in Baltimore, studied at Juilliard, moved to Europe where he trained with Nadia Boulanger, and closely worked with sitar composer Ravi Shankar. When he returned to the States in the 60s, he formed the Philip Glass Ensemble and still performs with that group to date. At almost 80, he's collaborated with folks from Paul Simon to Yo-Yo Ma, and presents and performs solo keyboard concerts around the world. In 2011, he founded the Philip Glass Center, a home for artists, scientists, and conservationists to collaborate and produce a culture of renewal for our time. So I want to invite these 2 friends up here to have a conversation and maybe even a bit of performance. Philip, Arturo, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bradley. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So I wanted to start maybe a little bit saying of how I ended up here next to you.
Okay.
When I was in college, the weirdest thing I had ever heard came on the radio. It was Knee Play Number 5.
Oh my God.
And I couldn't leave. I was like needed to go to school, and I couldn't leave to go to school because I had to listen to it. And then I listened to Einstein for God knows how many times. And fast forward 20-something years, and I'm in this little place called Carmel Valley that's near Carmel by the Sea. And I go into the video store, and there's a flyer there that says, Philip Glass presents the Days and Nights Festival. And I pick it up, and I'm like, well, it can't be like that Philip Glass. Is there like another Philip Glass that's doing this? And I went to the first festival, and I sat down to watch this dance piece, and right behind me, like he was sitting there. And during the break, I went up and said hello, and he was very kind with attention and conversation. And ever since then, I have begun photographing for the festival. And in the process of doing that, I have seen collaboration that is extraordinary because it spans from young people, like from 20 to 80, from Africa to Japan, to across cultures, across disciplines. And being able to be a part of that has been an amazing gift. And so what we'll hope to talk about today is a lot about that process and collaboration. And I wanted to start off by asking you about your journey, about how you ended up in Big Sur.
I was just thinking about that. The festival, we have it, it's the last week of September in Big Sur this year at the Henry Miller Library. It seems to be a kind of, it was a destination for which I didn't know it was, but it became that. When I was just beginning writing music, and then shortly after that I went to study at Juilliard, I would spend my time practicing the piano and working like everybody else. And I felt so cut off from everybody because that's all we did. And not just me, that everybody did that. And I thought, well, if this is going to be my life to be this isolated, this is not going to happen for me. So I began immediately, I was 19 at the time, I began working with dancers who were the same age as me. And that's always a good idea for anybody who wants to know where do you start. You start with people your age. And they, with luck, they stick around for a while. And I began working with theater companies, with dancers, and I began immediately, I wanted to get out of the practice room. And I also wanted to be able to perform. And I found that dancers always needed music. Theater very often needed music. And so that I didn't have to create a concert career at the beginning. I just started playing music with other people. And that just continued. And then the other thing that was really interesting was I was concerned very much that the music that I was doing, I guess you could say it was modernistic music of a certain kind. But I felt that I wanted to see how does that fit into the world that I live in, into the everyday world. And I began to think of the social issues, political issues, and by the time I was in my 30s, I was writing operas about people who changed the world through their ideas, like an opera about Gandhi, an opera about Einstein. I began using music, and theater music particularly, as a way of addressing the issues of life that we were living. That I didn't really want an abstract music, and though in many ways you can hear it as abstract, music has that quality. It always has the quality of, it is emotional and abstract at the same time, so we always have that. But I wanted to connect the music with the power of ideas. So I got involved with scientists. The other thing, when I was a kid, I was born in 37, so by 1945, 46, people began knowing who Einstein was because of the atomic bomb. But suddenly, this scientist became, he was actually our first science superstar. Everybody knew who Einstein was. And what we used to say in that time was that everyone knew who Einstein was, but no one understood the theory of relativity. They said 6 people in the world understood it, which was, I don't think that was an exaggeration. Well, actually, I think that many more people know it, but that was the idea. But I got very interested in scientists, and I began to see, so I was, when I was at the university, before I was at Juilliard, I was at the University of Chicago, and I was studying mathematics and physics and I wasn't particularly good at it. I loved it, but I realized that I was never going to be very good at that. What I could do, I was writing music. I knew that it was going to be music. So, but what I became very interested in scientists, in environmentalists, and anybody who was connected to the living organic world that we lived in. In a funny way, I became the composer's, the scientist's composer. I've written an opera about Einstein, Galileo, Kepler, Stephen Hawking. I did a movie about him. Just a couple years ago, Brian Greene, who was a string theory physicist, I did a piece with him. So I began writing music for scientists. And then, in fact, this year, one of the people who's going to come at the center is about music, it's about dance, it's about film, it's about poetry. All those things are in this festival this year. But it's also, I have these other issues too. So someone I know has written a book called The Well-Tempered City. And it's about, he does a very interesting, his name is Jonathan Rose. He does a very interesting study of cities from Ur, the first, we call that the first city. He compares it to Baltimore and Dayton, and he talks about the issues of what a city needs to do to be successful or to survive. You know, there are cities around the world that have suddenly disappeared, and we don't know why. They've become ghost towns. We think maybe the water supply disappeared or there was a disease or something, but you can visit these cities. So there are cities that have been successful. Paris, London, they've been around a long time. We don't know with San Francisco and Los Angeles, I don't know if they've been around that long yet, but any of the New World cities. Well, Mexico City, my God, that's an amazing city. When Cortez arrived and they saw Mexico City, at that time it was in the Valley of Mexico. You know this because it's from Mexico. There were 1 million people living there. Now at that time, we're talking about the 15th century. The European cities were 30,000, 40,000. London was 40, 50,000. Mexico City was 1 million people. You know, they had already mastered some, but did you know, of course you know all this, it was a city that was built on water.
Yeah.
And so there were, and it's all very interesting, but I got interested in all this stuff.
Yeah.
And so this year, Jonathan Rose is going to be giving talks about the well-tempered city. And he uses the well-tempered, that's from the Bach idea, the well-tempered clavier. It has to do about tuning, and it's a subtle and extremely intriguing idea about perfect tuning or about relative tuning. Actually, this is relative tuning. And besides that, Jonathan also plays electric bass, which you know, and he's going to be playing electric bass on one night of the concert. So I've got my scientists playing bass in the orchestra, which is, you know, that's so. This is these kinds of things interest me, where you have a meeting of cultures, and here's the interesting thing. I think the people that are interested in science very often interested in music and in dance. It's the same people. I mean. And the other thing that I became to realize is the more I knew about science, I began to think of scientists as a kind of poetry.
Yeah, and so that's like one of the things I wanted to ask you about was to talk a little bit about the piece for Brian Greene around the black holes, and like you take a concept around physics concepts, and how do you match those to musical language?
Now, I did the black hole, which of course everybody knows this. I'll tell you anyway. If you get too near a black hole, you get sucked into it and you can't get out. But the other property of time slows down, so that when you get into the black hole, time has actually stopped. So when I was writing this piece, Brian was calling me and say, "Have you got to the part where the time slows down?" I said, "Yeah, I'm working on it now." He said, "Can I come down and hear it?" I said, "Okay." So he came down to the studio, and I played this piece where the music was very high and moving very fast, and as it goes lower and lower, it gets slower and slower, and finally it just stops. And Brian said, "Yeah, that's it." And he said, "You know, I insist that this is accurate." You know, though it was, again, I was turning science into poetry, actually. But now getting back to this idea about poetry, and I'm very serious about this. Einstein was asked, once he was describing where he got his ideas about science, the idea of relativity, theory of relativity, he said, well, this is what he said. I imagine myself sitting on a beam of light, and the beam of light is rushing through the universe at the speed of light. And I looked around me, I saw everything rushing past me, and I was standing still. He said after that, it was just a question of figuring out the mathematics, which he said was hard for him, but evidently it wasn't that hard. I mean, not that hard for him. But so I began to see that not only him, but you look at someone like Darwin, and the biological sciences are very different from the physical sciences. The physical sciences, we do a lot of deduction and mathematics. With biological science, there's induction. That means a lot of observation. he went on the famous Voyage of the Beagle. It was on, I think, out for about 2 years in a boat. And just looking at species and how they changed from island. He was out in the South Seas, and he went from island to island. He would see that almost the same species would be in another island, but it had changed a little bit. And he began to see how biological entities like this could change. And he didn't think very much about it. He just collected information. And he finally came up with this astonishing idea of mutation, that things change because of sunspots or whatever, for natural reasons. And then what he called natural selection, which is that after the mutation changed, this new entity, if it had survivability, it would then replace the non-mutated one, so that natural selection became a form of, that's where the idea of evolution came from. Now this is also an astonishing, if you think about it, I mean, can you imagine if you had been doing this and you've been on a boat for 2 years just looking at flowers, would you have come up with this idea? I don't know. I just find it that these amazing scientists, they have the dreams of poets. And then they have to find the science to explain it. But without the vision, there's no theory. So in a way, I began to see, I came to this as a very young man. I began to see science as a form of poetry. A poetry which had the ability to create technology, which then really changes things even more rapidly. Mm-hmm. So I got very involved with the idea of science and music, and then, of course, because as I'm a modern person, I began to think about climate change and things like that. And so the concerts that we do, I'm trying to bring them all together, and we're actually kind of succeeding. Yeah. And this time, Jonathan is going to come and give a talk about the city. Mm-hmm. I've got the copy of the final draft. It's not been printed yet. It's so interesting to read. It is kind of like poetry, but it took someone who was willing to sit down and think about this, mm-hmm. and to come up with it. You know Jonathan.
Yeah. And
so, anyway, what was the question?
No, you talked about it. It was about how you set black holes to music, or the theory behind it to music.
You know, what I find is that it's not just my ideas. I find many people are interested in science and art and dance and theater, poetry.
Yeah, which takes
it goes together very well.
Which takes me to another thing that I got to watch, which was the concept around language and collaboration. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about when you began collaborating with Fode, Suso.
That's interesting. That's a different thing. I was collaborating with dancers and filmmakers and then I began collaborating with composers. First, just people that I knew, but then I began working with composers from completely different traditions. And that's really changed my ideas about music more than anything else. I just played Arturo some music that I had made with some indigenous people from Mexico, Indians actually, who live in the mountains. They didn't even speak Spanish. I certainly didn't speak in the Indian languages. And we managed to put a record together. Mm-hmm. And with Fode Suso, here's a griot. He sings, he's from the Mandingo people in West Africa and the Gambia. That's near Senegal and Mali, kind of right in between them. And he tells the story of the Mandingo people in music. The griots do that. They have something like 107, 106 songs that they have to learn. I know him very well. I met him more than 35 years ago. We do concerts quite a lot together now since then. But let me tell you a funny story, and then maybe we'll go on to something else, because I can tell funny stories all night without getting to the point that we're maybe trying to get to, which I'm not even sure what it is. But so the first time I sat on Fode, he has a big choral, which is a gourd, and there's 17, or is it 17, 18 strings, and he plays the strings. It's like a harp. And the gourd takes the sound and it comes out that way. Of course, we also amplify it too. So we were asked to do, I was asked to do music for a play by Jean Genet called Les Paravents, The Screens. And now it's a story about the French in North Africa. So I thought, well, maybe I should do a piece with an African composer, and I would be the European-based, not European, but the music is based on Central European art music, so that goes that. And so I asked Fode, I'd gone on a trip with him to Africa, working with Godfrey Reggio on a movie called Paul Kotze, and he had taken me to hear music, but I hadn't thought that much about the music itself. I mean, I liked it, but I didn't really think about how it was made. And then I called Fode, I said, I have to do this piece. We have to do African and European music, sometimes together, but sometimes separate. Okay, so we came to the studio, and now I knew this from my experiences, that the first thing we had to do was to tune the instruments. I mean, without that, we can't even play. This is basic stuff. The piano was a little too complicated. So we kept the piano, and he would tune to the piano. Now, the scale in the African music is a little bit different. The fourth, I don't know if not to get too technical, but the fourth note of the scale is a little more flat than ours is. And the third is a little more sharp. So if you listen to, if he played with the piano, it would be, somebody would sound out of tune. It probably would have been him, because I could play louder than him, but not necessarily. But he had lived in the States for a while. He traveled back and forth to Africa, but he came, and he had learned to retune. He was retuning his instrument. He was playing with Herbie Hancock and people like that, and playing at jazz, and he had to tune with them, so he knew how to do it. I didn't know anything about this, so we sat down, and he said, he played a note which was similar to an A, very close to an A. He said, "This is the first note." And I said, "Okay, it's the A. Here's the A. Here's my piano note." And he tuned it. Got it right. And he nodded his head, and I go to the B flat above that, and he played actually I went to the B natural, and because we were kind of in D, and he played the B. And I said, "Wait a second, what do you call the first note?" He said, "Oh, that's the first note." I said, "Okay." I said, "Did the second note?" I said, "What do you call this note?" He said, "I call that the second note." And then we got to the third note, which is a C sharp. I tuned it, and he said, "I knew what was coming." I said, and he said, that's the one that comes after the one before." And then I had the sudden realization that his notes didn't have names. Now, when I was a kid, I took my first flute lesson with a flutist from the Peabody Conservatory in Baltimore. And he gave me a flute. You hold it like this. He said, "Okay, put your thumb here and the finger there." And I had the position. And I blow through the hole here. And then he pointed on the page. He said, "That's a B." He showed me what it looked like. He showed me what it sounded like. And he showed me how to finger it. So at that moment, I identified the name of the note, the position of the hand, and the intonation of the note. It was the sound of the note, the key of the note. This was that. I would guess 25 years later, 20 years later. I'm sitting with this guy, and he tells me there are no names to the notes. And I almost fainted. I was so shocked. I felt like the floor had opened up and I was floating in the air. I thought I have to stop. And I got up and I had to walk out and walked around. And I said, I couldn't fathom this. that he could play music without knowing the names of the notes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so we got over that. We ended up being collaborators, and we've done many concerts together. And we tuned, he knows the names of the notes now, by the way. But he never bothered to know them before that. Mm-hmm. So when I began working with people from other traditions, the way we understand music, not emotionally, but structurally or intellectually, was very different. Emotionally, I could understand it very quickly, but how he thought about it, I didn't. And this happened some years before. It happened when I had been working with Ravi Shankar, and I was working with Ala Raka. I was learning the rhythmic system of Indian music. That's another story. I won't get into it. Anyway, that was another good story, which I'm not going to tell now. But the point was is that I began to see that that in order for musicians to play together who come from it, we have to start to make some accommodation. And when he went back to Africa, by the way, and his friends found out he had retuned the instruments, they were very upset. They said, "You can't retune the kora." He said, "If you want to play in Europe or America, you got to retune." They said, "No, we're not going to retune." He said, "Well, then you're not going to play out. You're not going to play there." And so he said, "Well, let me hear you play." And then he had retuned the kora, and he was playing the kora, and they said it was sounding perfect. Same thing happened to Ravi Shankar when he came to America and Europe first and did some big concerts. Back in India, they thought he had betrayed the raga, and he had to go back to India and did a big concert. He told me this. He did a big concert in Bombay and one in Delhi, and he had to prove to people that he could still play the sitar. They thought he had forgotten how to play it.
Wow.
So the tuning thing is a big deal. But what was interesting was that I began to understand that there's a relative truth to music and there's an absolute truth. The absolute truth we have no problem with. It's the relative truth that we have the problem with. This is the tuning. But when I don't have to do the tuning, I can totally get. Working with the Mexican musicians, I could not figure how they counted. They were doing an rhythmic cycle, but it sounded to me like there would be a cycle of 15, then a cycle of 15, a cycle of 15, then there'd be a cycle of 14. And I counted again, and every third time it would be 14. I said, "Okay, I got it." And then the next time they did it, it was 16. I couldn't figure, well, how did they, and did they just remember that? I mean, and were they counting at all? I think they weren't counting. And I was playing with this one guy who was playing we called it a guitar. It looks like a guitar, but he built it himself. And we had someone translate into Spanish for me. And I was playing with him a while, and I was trying just to play with him. And after all, he said, "You got it, you got it." And then I began playing with him, and I've missed it again. I never figured out how to do it. But what I figured out, another thing, a different thing, I found out if I played in a cycle long enough that the inconsistencies didn't matter. In other words, everything would add up to maybe 86 or something like that. So I had to work in a very big cycle, and then we could be together.
And that takes me to like he's going to play a little bit, but there's one more question before we play for a little bit and come back to talking later, which is, so you take these rooms that have like Jaron Lanier, Jonathan Rowe, so the guy that comes from like a technology background. You've got like Suso, you've got like all of these people from different artistic sensibilities, instruments, musical language. Like they're very all talented, strong-minded. How do you get?
Well, at the beginning, in the early '60s, we used to get together and we'd have what we called a world band. And you'd find someone from Africa, you'd get someone from India, and you all get together, and it sounded terrible. Because everybody was in a different key. slightly different. It's not that you were in a different key, but the fourths were different, the thirds were different, the sixths were different, so that someone was always out of tune. And it never, we never sat down and retuned. And we just basically, these world bands just dissolved. And after a while, no one did it anymore. It didn't start up again until I began playing with people, and we actually addressed the issue of tuning. And that's why it was so, and we did, since we were in North America, that's what we used the European tuning. But now, there's certain instruments you can't use. For example, a bellophone, which is like a xylophone, you can't retune it. So you won't find that instrument in any of the, you won't find the African bellophone, but you'll find in my music an American xylophone. I have to pick one that's, so some things you can't tune. Now in Australia, the didgeridoo player, do you know what a didgeridoo is? I had one guy play, I love this guy, Mark Atkins, and I said, Mark, how do you make, where do you get that instrument? He said, well, I get a limb off a tree, and then I put the ants in, and the ants eat their way through the center. He said, I have to come back in about maybe 4 or 5 weeks, and then knock it out, and all the inside of it goes out, and I have a long tube, and he said, and that's what I play. And I had these fantastic conversations. I said, okay, now when I was playing with him, I said, how do you play that? What are you thinking about when you're playing it? He said, well, he said, and we're playing, we're doing a piece called Orion. I did it with musicians from Brazil, from Africa, from China. I had 5 or 6. A guy from Ashley McIsaac from Cape Breton who played a violin, and so I began asking people where their music came from. This was the most interesting thing. I'd say, where does the music come from? It's a very simple question. And Mark said, oh, I'll tell you. I get to this place in the music, and I close my eyes, and I see a kangaroo running across the outback. And I play the music that goes with him. I asked Ravi Shankar, I asked everybody this question. You get the most, it's a very simple question. And if you ask it not knowing what the answer is, you'll get the answer. They'll tell you what they think. I asked Ravi Shankar once, I said, Raviji, where does this music come from? I was sitting with him in his hotel room in London. It was years and years ago. And he turned, this is a great story. He was sitting on the bed cross-legged, and I was sitting in a chair. And on the table was a picture of an Indian gentleman in a naval kind of coat. He turned to the picture, and he did a full prostration, bowed to the picture, and he said, through the grace of the Guru, the music is coming to me. Isn't that beautiful?
Yeah.
Now, let me tell you one more, because you'll like this one. This is from the Indian, the Mexican guy. I like to tell Mexican stories. So, we had done a concert together. We had just done a concert together in a little place called Real de Catores, and with these 2 musicians, and there was one guy who was our translator. And we went out afterwards to have a nice fire, and they like to do that, a nice big fire outside. The concert was over, we all went out to do the fire. And Tayao was standing there, and I say, Tayao, where does that music come from? The same question. You'll never get, you can't imagine what people say. Unimaginable thing. He said, well, I looked at my father, my grandfather, the fire. My grandfather, the fire, has no mouth. So when he wants to sing, he has to use mine.
Oh, wow.
I mean, these are revelations that are profound. And I must say that I've gone through my life in music talking to people very simply about the music and asking what. And then people ask me the same thing. I have even better. I don't know if we'll go into that. So let's go into. Shall we better go into something else?
Yes, the piano, and then I'll ask you where that music came from.
Oh, okay. I said I was going to play. We had a wonderful concert yesterday, and I felt I couldn't come here and not play tonight. So it's going to be one piece called Mad Rush. I'm playing it because he likes that piece. I hope you like it too. It's a piece originally written for the organ of St. John the Divine, the Cathedral in New York. It was on the occasion of the Dalai Lama's first visit to New York in '78. And they were going to give a talk, and the people who organized the event weren't sure when he was going to arrive exactly. So they said, well, could you just play some music until he comes? Oh, I didn't know when he was going to come either. So I composed the music for that. And that, on occasion, I played for about I'm not going to play for half an hour now, I'll play about 14 minutes. So I made a piece of indefinite length. Actually not a problem. On that occasion, it was half an hour. But I'm going to play a show, about half that version right now. So this is, the piece is called Mad Rush. Thank you. Thank you.
I love you, man.
What's that?
I love you, man. So where did that come from?
You know, I asked myself the same question, and I could never come up with the right answer. It was something, I come up with an answer for a while. I first said, well, music is a kind of language. But, you know, it's like saying a chicken is kind of like a bird. It doesn't tell you anything. It doesn't tell you something you already don't know. It didn't reveal anything to me, and I was very dissatisfied with that. But for a long while, I had no answer. So I would continue asking people. And then about 4 or 5 years ago, I was giving a talk kind of like we're doing right now. And someone in the audience said, well, where does music come from? And here's what I did. I said something I wasn't prepared to say. It was almost like someone else had said it. I said, well, music is a place. It's as real as Chicago or Atlanta or Boston. It's a place. And when you go to listen to music, you go to that place. I thought, okay. I hadn't heard that one before, and I thought that seems right to me.
So one of the things that I appreciate the most about your career is that you have these collaborations, like you with Godfrey began with Koyaanisqatsi and made a movie a couple of years ago, well, a year or two ago. You have Suso, you have the ensemble that has been together for a really long time. And so how do you manage to have like all of these great collaborative friendships over that long a period of time and have them sustain?
You know, music is, above everything else, it's a social activity. It's not only between myself and the audience, but between the people that play. I accepted that very early. As a boy, I played a flute in an orchestra. I was 10 years old. I was playing in the orchestra then. Music to me was always something that people did together. It wasn't a problem. I've met now, I've met several players, musicians here on this trip here, and I'm going to be playing with them at some point. As soon as I hear somebody or I meet them, if I like them, I want to play music with them. And then I find a way to do it. Now, then I have to look in and say, do I really have time to do this? And I look in the schedule, yeah, there is this date, and I find it, and I just put the date in. And it's a kind of, let's say, not an obsession, because that has a negative sound to it. It's an attraction that is very strong for me. And so playing with other people, I do solo concerts, and I like to do them in a certain way, because when I do solo concerts, I can often play pieces differently. If I play with other people, then I have to play the way I wrote it. Well, that's pretty much the way I wrote it. But I'd like to do solo concerts also, because that's something different. Then it's not so much about playing with another person, but playing in front of people. Now, this is the most interesting thing. Music is a transaction between, that's when we say language, but it's something that passes between us. You know, they found, I read this a year or so ago, they found in some caves, these caves are always in France for some reason, they found they think it's an instrument. They found wings of a pigeon that were hollowed out, and they just thought that these were very early versions of flute, 70,000 years ago. You know, I think that was the first language. Maybe people picked it up and they made a sound. Do you go to, you know, I also never miss going to one of these natural history museums and I find them extreme, not only to see what contemporary people are like, but to go back in time That's why reading Jonathan's book about the first city, Ur, is so interesting for me. The thing is that our humanness, the thing that makes us distinct from, it seems unique in a way. Of course, it's probably maybe not unique, but it strikes us that way. And then, so that it's not just our attachment, even our, what is the opposite of attachment? When we're repelled by certain activities, certain people, and certain, whatever it is, whether we're attracted to it or repelled by it, it's so strong. You know, this is an interesting thing. We talk about the art of ancient times, and we can see them. The vases from Egypt, or the pyramids in Mexico, or the clothing that is they find that's left over from some nomadic people living in Siberia or someplace like that. Everything, I find that extremely interesting and deeply moving, and I'm not sure why, because I don't need to read about it. I just need to be in the presence of it. So in a way, you say, how do I do? I'm drawn to do it. It's my nature to play music, and I played it all my life. And if I meet someone, if I have any connection to them at all, if they can play music, I'll play music with them. Because something happens. Isn't that so?
Yeah, I've seen that.
Yeah.
And so, coming back to the festival, what would be your vision or your hope?
What?
Vision or hope around the festival?
I would like, we're building the festival up. This year, Victor Sanchez has come from Mexico. He works in the field of what we call human development, human behavior. He has amazing things that he does. He takes people into the desert, and in there we're going to go into there are a number of national forests in the area. Pfeiffer Forest is right there, down there in Big Sur. And he goes in with 10, 20, sometimes 30 people. And they can go for a week. I think what we're going to do there, he'll work in the daytimes with a group of people. And these are actually transforming experiences, because he spent his life doing this. And he's found out things in nature which you have no idea what they are. I've seen them because I've been with them. So his coming, he'll be in the daytime. Then we have the concerts at night, and it will be, in this case, we have a movie of Laurie Anderson called Her Dog Movie, wonderful movie, and she just made it. And then the second night, I'm doing an evening of poetry and music with her. Then we have the Club Diamond, which is a small but very intense and beautiful theater piece for one performer and a musician, and based on the activity of street performers in Tokyo, who go around and entertain children, and they give them candy, and they just go from place to place to do that. And this character is the character of this piece. You have to see it. It's really beautiful. We're going to have some music before then, but I'm going to get some music from younger composers. Then the next night we have this piece by Jerry Quickly. It's called The Whistleblower. It's about
Edward Snowden.
Yes.
And the surveillance state,
Yeah,
and
the whole thing. And it's wildly funny, and very and touching, and it's mixed in with parts about Allen Ginsberg. And how he did that, I don't know, but he's got Allen in there too.
Yeah, I'll expand on that a little bit. The Allen Ginsberg piece is written from the perspective of the agent that is assigned to surveil him. And it's derived from the papers that they got published about this agent that was surveilling Ginsberg. And
he got the papers from what was the Freedom of Information Act. He got these papers, and it becomes the thing. And then, so we have that one, and then, so then we'll have some, and then Fode Suso will be playing, my Gambian friend. We'll be doing music, we'll be doing, I think that's one where, I think our bass player will be playing with us. That's with a string quartet with Jerry Quickly. But I think it'll just be Fode and myself.
Yeah.
So that is, it's with a very few handful of people, we cover a very big area of activity.
Yeah. And so, like, if the festival sounds really cool, and I wanted, if you have any questions that you want to ask him, part of the goal of coming here today is feel free to ask him anything. We still have some time, and I wanted to allow enough time for that. But if the idea of the festival sounds like really interesting to you, and you want to be involved or engaged in some way, just grab me and when we're done here,
yeah.
And we can take it from there, because I think it's extraordinary that, like, if you were anywhere else in the world, you would go to New York and you would like perform at Carnegie Hall or the Met, and you'd come out, do your thing, and then like you'd be out and they'll be waving from the audience, but that would be about it. And here there's an opportunity to like be with 100, 200 people. And
maybe 300. And
yeah.
We're at the Henry Miller Library, which it's an outdoor venue in the redwoods, and it's just very intimate. Mm-hmm. And it probably could be 300 people. It's legal now for him to do these concerts, but he had to get it through some kind of permit through the state or something. Mm-hmm. And they're allowing him 300 people.
Okay. So does anybody have any questions that they would like to ask Phil? Please come up to the microphone.
Hi, how are you? Actually, first question would be, when is the Henry Miller show?
The Henry Miller Memorial Library, last weekend of September.
It's in Big Sur.
In Big Sur.
Last weekend, okay, great. I had a question. I play music most of my life, and it's great to see someone, with such a library and done so much. And one thing I've seen, including myself, is a lot of people who play music do it out of a passion, and then they lose that passion or they become uninspired. And you spoke a little earlier about like someone being inspired as simple as imagining a kangaroo running. And I was just wondering, like, what is your inspiration, or how do you continue to find inspiration in writing music throughout your entire life?
I didn't come here.
Yeah, so how do you find and keep inspiration throughout your life? What feeds you creative?
It's my insane, intense curiosity, really. I find it all so interesting. I have no trouble. I have trouble sleeping in the morning. I get up early and start thinking about this stuff. Right now I'm working on Jerry's the music for Jerry's piece, which we're going to be starting to rehearse in May. So I get up for that, and then I'm working on a new symphony later in the day. I know that I find it very interesting. Right now there's a movement in the world of performance and music of younger people in their 20s and early 30s. That's extremely interesting, and it's happening. This happened. I can tell you that many of you don't know this, but 60 years ago, when the McCarthy communist trials were going on, at that time it was a terrible time. It was as bad as Trump. It was really that bad. I mean, McCarthy was a real. Anyway, at that time, what happened? You had Allen Ginsberg coming around, and then you had William Burroughs, and you had all this. There was a sudden explosion of art, of creativity. And I began to think, that's Mother Nature. Balancing it. You get some insanity here, then you have to have some art over here to make it bearable. I really believe that's true. Now, I don't have to tell you, the news, you could barely watch it. It's horrific, it's terrible. And yet at the same time, I find young people as more idealistic and committed to self-expression and exploration of their humanity than I have seen in 30 or 40 years. It's very, very, it's a very, very rich time right now for poets, for musicians, for artists. So if you get tired of watching this junk on television, go out and see some of this stuff. It's really, I'm sure that you can find it. It's all over the place.
I try to fill my life with that on a daily basis. Thank you.
Hi. About 5 years ago, a friend of mine said that she had just released an album of her own compositions. And I said, oh, that's nice. I've never been able to compose music. And she said, your best friend just died. Go over to the piano and play something. Okay. And I went over and started at A minor and something, and then it kind of worked into another key, and then it finished, and I'd never experienced anything like that. And since then my first thought is, well, is this really music? You know, because I did it. But it was, you know, now I can play some things.
By the way, you're the piano tuner, right?
Yes.
This is the guy that tuned the piano. and he told me just before the concert, he said, yeah, I've been tuning the piano all my life, and I've just started to write music now. So maybe you'll...
Thank you.
Thank you for your thoughts.
Well, first I want to thank you for being here. You've been sort of one of the gods in my musical pantheon since I first saw Oriana Scazzi back in the early 80s when it first came out. I wanted to know if you've thought about, or have you talked about how the internet and the communication technology we have now and sort of the democratizing elements of that are part of that explosion of creativity and self-expression you had just mentioned.
So how do you think the internet has democratized and opened up creativity?
It's helped me a lot. I was writing music for a play recently. I was in the theater, and the director said, I need a song for the end of the play. So I was watching the rehearsal, I wrote the song, and I took a picture of it with my camera, my little, you know, iPhone. And I sent it on the internet to my office downtown. They took it, they turned it into, the person down there made a demo from it, and a few minutes later, he sent it up by internet. I had a version of the piece done within about an hour. That's the internet for you. I mean, you can't knock that. And I said, oh, I got the song. Do you want to give it to? He said, when did you write it? I said, well, you were rehearsing, so I just decided to write it. And he said, do you want to give it to Ed now? He said, well, yeah, we'll give it to. So that song ended up. So the internet's amazing. You know, when I find out, first I thought I had to scan things. Then I realized I could just take a picture and send the picture to and someone would put it into the computer. And it's amazing, huh? So how does it? I find it mainly helpful. It helps me to. Years ago, when I was working on, I think it was The Hours or something like that. It was a movie, but it was being recorded in London, and the director called me up. I was in Nova Scotia. He said, I need some changes. I need it by tomorrow afternoon. I said, Scott, you're not going to get it tomorrow afternoon. He said, yes, I will. He said, what are you going to do? He said, someone's flying to Halifax right now. They'll be at your door in 6 hours. Do the rewrite, give it to him. He'll get back on the plane, and I'll give it by tomorrow afternoon. And he did. So that was the old days. Today, he would just call me up and say, hey, send the piece, and I would send it by internet. It's amazing, huh? Are there any bad? I guess there are bad things, but I tend to look at the positive stuff. And you probably gathered that already. I tend to look at the positive side of things.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name's Rick. I assume decades ago, when you started composing, you used paper, pencil, score sheet and a piano. As the decades go by, technology became available. Have you changed your process? Do you use software?
Well, I still use, now what I have to do, the people that make the music paper don't do it anymore, but what I found is that their printers, if you give them a sample of what you want, they'll print it for you. I'm still writing with pencil and paper.
You are.
I am, and then what I have some young fellows that work in the studio for me, and they put it into the computer. Once it gets in the computer, now everybody can deal with it. But the manuscript, no one can deal with that anymore.
Because I use software, I use technology devices. Sometimes I use my phone for an idea, and then I go to the paper, and you know.
Well, you're using both. I find it, you know, at this point, and my friends say, well, why don't you just learn to write it into a computer? And you know, I said, well, how long will it take me to really learn to do it? They say about 6 weeks. I said, 6 weeks? I can write a string quartet in 6 weeks. I said, well, what would you rather me do? Write a string quartet or to learn how? He said, no, you go write the string quartet.
Thank you very much.
But, you know, there's another thing about the manuscript, by the way. I've got, I don't know how many thousands of pages I've got a manuscript. If you write music and you have files, right?
Yeah.
I can sell my manuscripts. You can't sell your files.
But I can print and become files. Right?
Well, okay, I'll give you that.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for coming, Philip, and for the amazing performance of Mad Rush. So Bradley was mentioning on the beginning of the talk about how touched he was yesterday by the performance. And I was very touched by your performance as well. I'm going to treasure it forever. I think we all have these performances that we get to see, and it can be something very formal, like at Carnegie Hall, or it can be somebody playing, you know, the guitar in front of you, that we treasure very much. And I would like to ask you, do you have one or a few specific things that you witnessed in music that you would like to take with you to eternity?
There are two things that I saw that were really amazing. When I was about 18 or 17 or 18, I was in New York, and Segovia came to play at Carnegie Hall. Carnegie Hall is a pretty big hall. He sat at the front of the stage in a chair, and he kind of, a little guy, he leaned over with a guitar. The place was packed. He began playing very quietly. After about a few minutes, it filled the room. You could hear every note he did. And he sat and just played for maybe 75, 80 minutes. It was a memorable concert. Then I had another memorable concert. About the same time, I was at the Village Vanguard in New York, and John Coltrane was playing with a band. And he was playing insanely good, beautiful music. But you know how a band will come, it was break time. So the band stopped and they went to the bar. Coltrane just kept playing. He played straight through the break. He was still playing. The changes and everything. They came back from the break, they picked up their instruments and they just started playing again. He never stopped. I said, oh boy, that's a monster. Monster talent.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Hi there. So you told the story earlier about when you were playing with the musician who played the gourd harp, and how, you know, the tuning was very different from your piano and sort of the consonances that you're used to, and that, you know, you didn't tune your piano to adjust to him and he adjusted to you. Have you ever had to adjust to another tuning system when in a collaboration, and really had to internalize what they consider consonants as what we might consider dissonances? And if so, what was your experience with that?
I haven't done, when I've worked with people, mostly the people who've been, they might be Indian or from Africa, or maybe from Australia. The Australian, that guy, in order to change keys, he had another instrument with him. He couldn't just cut off part of it, or he wasn't willing to. Mostly, it's just the way it is. I mean, we have all, so they're over here where we are. We got all these instruments playing. So for 6 or 8 of us to change our tuning, and there's one guy who's out of tune, but he's not really out of tune, he's playing in his own tuning. It's easier for him to change than for us, and we usually do it that way. I haven't had to do that.
Yeah, but separate from tuning, like I thought when I heard you talk about when you first got exposed to Ravi G's music,
Yeah.
and you were like trying to note it and you kept getting it.
Well, that's different. I had problems with the rhythmic structure. This wasn't about the tuning. I was writing. I could write them because Ravi G. I asked him what he was going to do. He said, "Well, I'm going to play a rocker, which is usually an F sharp, but I'm going to play it down half a step. It will be an F for everybody else." And that's what he did. So he made it very easy for us. But I was writing down the music, and the alla rocca, the tabla player, he said no, the accents are in the wrong place. They're in the wrong place. And I didn't know what he meant. And so I would try it, write it out again in a different way. And he said, nope. And he said the notes are the same. The notes are the same. I didn't know what the hell I was talking about. And it was the first morning of our club. You know, I was hired for that morning, and I couldn't afford to get fired. I was living on a very small fellowship in Paris, and I knew I had to solve this problem. And it's nothing like, it was like I say, nothing like an execution to focus the mind. So my execution would have been if I got fired. And I looked at the music paper, and I did an inspiring thing. I took my eraser and I erased all the bar lines. And I looked at it again, and I saw a string of notes. And I looked at it, and now I saw groups of 2s and 3s. I didn't see the bar lines anymore. I saw 3, 3, 2, 2, 2, 3, 3, 2, 2. So, and I realized just by looking at it, and I saw that, I don't know how I did this very, very quickly. I saw that the first 4 or 5 notes, they would add up to 16. The second was 16, the third was 16. And I saw that there was a larger group of 16 that all the 3s and 2s fit into. And so I just put the bar line there, and I said, what's this? And he said, oh, that's called the tal. And the tal means the length of the, and I found out later there could be 14 beats, it could be 17 beats, it could be 8 beats. But the music would have to follow that all the way through. Then I found out also later, I didn't know this at the time, that when they played the first beat, they called that the psalm. Now, when the sitar player was playing with the tabla player, sometimes they would be together at the psalm, but sometimes they would purposely miss the psalm for 2 or 3 cycles. And if you were in the audience was like this. They're getting very nervous, and finally they came to the psalm, and they go, it was the most amazing. This was in China. It was Madras at the time when I first saw this happen, and the whole audience just went. Everyone hit. But so the play of the music had to do with the length of the rhythm, not with the key of the piece. You know, in Western music, the tension is between the tonality and the melody, between the harmony and the melody. I put it that way. For traditional rhythmic music, is mostly just decorative, really. In Western and Indian music, the tension was completely between the rhythm and the vocal line. There was no harmony. But I was very, thinking back on it, that probably changed my life. The fact that I figured that out, I don't even know how I did. It was just luck in a certain way. If I had gotten, because after that I stayed with Ravi for the rest of that week, and I began working with him, and later on I played music with him, so it opened up a whole world of music for me. Had I missed that moment, I would have been fired. And I'd be teaching counterpoint in some jerk would have conservatory in Ohio or someplace.
Thank you.
That sounds awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Trying to figure out how to phrase this. So you write a piece of music, people perform it, right? We have pieces of music, and that's been going on for quite a long time, but there's this modern phenomenon of mashing up and remixing, which seems to be throwing all of that for a loop. People write lots of tiny bits of music, people perform by...
Yeah.
What do you think of that? It seems to be changing.
I actually encourage it. When someone, we have a record that we put out on our record company, where we had people do covers of pieces of mine.
Mm-hmm.
They did exactly what you're saying.
Right.
And I said, well, I wrote it that way, but let me hear what someone else thinks about it. I was always interested in what they did. No, that's not always true. I just had a conversation with a conductor who was looking at a new piece of mine for 2 pianos and orchestra, a double piano concerto. He said, well, I'm going to the rehearsal tomorrow, but I have to tell you that I think the writing is much too thick for the orchestra. I said, yeah, I said, Dennis, that's what I'm writing these days. I'm writing very dense music. I said, look, if you want to, just thin it out if you want. You can play it any way you want to. It's not going to bother me. Of course, when I was thinking to myself, I'll just put the music right back in afterwards anyway. It wasn't going to change it. But I said, if it makes you happy to do it that way, just go ahead and do it. And he called me up the next day, and he said, well, we tried it out. I tried it out with your orchestration, and it sounded great. He said, it was the first time this guy ever said to me, he said, I was wrong and you were right. He never had said that. I've been playing music of mine for 30 years. First time he said, no, you were right. But I said, I've said this before, maybe yesterday, what happens is that you begin to hear music differently. Now, if I can hear it differently, so I hear what sounds right to me sounds different. I'm not even sure why that is. The neurologists say that the brain continues to evolve, or does it devolve? I don't know. But I find that I'm actually hearing things differently, and I'm writing different music. And I don't know why, except things sound right to me that didn't sound right to me before, and I write them down and I make everyone play it the way I wrote it. And people who have known the music very well will try to correct it, and they said this is wrong. And I said no, it's not wrong. Just play the way I wrote it. But apart from that, there are a lot of people make arrangements. Like a flutist will make arrangements of a violin concerto because I haven't written a flute concerto, or someone will take a piece for orchestra and they'll play it with a smaller orchestra, and they'll say, what do you think? And I said, well, I think if you make an arrangement, I want a copy of it, and it'll belong to my company, and we'll rent it out to other people if it's good, and if it isn't good, I won't use it. But I don't really... Same thing with dance companies, and they want to take a piece of music. They said, do you want to see our company dance? I said, hell no, just take the music and do the dance. What am I going to do, tell them I don't like the dance? Well, I don't know about dance. So I'm actually more interested in what other people think, except when it's a new piece and I'm working on language, then I want to hear, I'm very obsessed right now with a different language in my music that's happened in the last 2 or 3 years. I can see that it's happening. And a cellist friend of mine was playing a partita I wrote for solo cello, and I went to hear the recording, and it took him hours to record one piece. I said, it took him about an hour or two just to record it. I said, what do you think? I said, Matt, what do you think of this? He said, well, it's an amazing piece of music. I said, yeah, but who the hell's going to play it? He said, oh, people will play it. He said they'll learn to play it and they'll play it. And that's probably true. Now, but is that a good idea? I don't know. I don't know the answer to these things. In many ways, after the moment of writing, I'm just another listener. It depends whether I still got my composer hat on. If my composer hat isn't on, I don't hear it that way anymore. And I'm very open to different things. I rarely tell people that they've done it wrong, unless they've actually done it wrong.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, is this a yes/no question? If it's a short question with a short answer, we can do this as
The short answer is the hard part. Sorry about that.
I'm not going to
I'll
say
try
that.
to
The answer doesn't depend on me, I guess. I'm just kind of curious about the creative process, your creative process in general. Can I?
The answer is yes.
So one thing I find amazing and fascinating about music is how, I've heard analysis of pieces by Chopin, Beethoven, where there's this small motive of 3-4 notes that, it gradually generates the whole entirety of a piece. And I find it absolutely incredible how that process can come up, how the process worked to come up with that piece, yet you have these little repetitive motives from beginning to end. And I wonder, how do you do it? What's your process? Do you start with the whole? Do you start with some melodies, with some small idea?
It can be anything really, but a lot of it is detail. I was watching I have a 14-year-old son who was doing a drawing the other day, and he was doing the tiniest little lines. He just took his time and just put all the lines in he wanted to. And I could see he was getting obsessed with some detail, and that happens in music too. And now, particularly, I'll write a piece and I'll write some music, and I'll go back and play it the next day. I'll play it on the piano or look at it, and I'm not sure I got it right. The problem is, did I hear it right? The biggest problem is, am I writing down what I heard? And once I write it down, I'm not sure anymore, because the evidence of the written music can be compelling, but it might not be correct. One of the biggest problems I have is, am I writing down what I hear? And I'm not sure. I do my best. I think everyone has that problem. I listen to the Grosse Fuge of Beethoven. I'm not sure of some of those notes. Maybe he didn't hear them either. I don't know, but you hear that in other people's music, don't you? Or are you a musician?
I wish.
Yeah,
A
but
very poor one.
but you can hear things and you say, I wonder if that, I don't know. Okay, I'm sorry we ran out of time.
This was such a treat. We really, on behalf of Google, really want to thank both of you for the wisdom you shared, the performance. It was really special and meaningful for us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Happy to be here.